Thank you all very much for coming. My name is Brian Anderson. I'm the editor of City Journal magazine. On behalf of the Manhattan Institute, I'd like to welcome all of you and C-SPAN to what is certain to be a fascinating discussion on the relationship and entwined legacy of two giants, maybe the two giants, of 20th century American conservatism, William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan. The occasion is the publication by Basic Books of William F. Buckley's final book, The Reagan I Knew, a nearly 300-page testimony to a friendship between the man who, in the pages of the remarkable magazine that he founded, National Review, and through his own inexhaustible writing and speaking, launched modern conservatism as an intellectual movement, and the visionary statesman who brought those ideas into the White House and transformed America forever. Biographer Edmund Morris found Reagan such an impenetrable, distant figure that he famously resorted to an imaginary figure, an exercise in literary imagination to try and capture his elusive subject. What the reader of this book will immediately discover, by contrast, is a surprising degree of warmth and intimacy in the exchanges between these two men, whose relationship spanned 3 decades. This was a real friendship. More important, the book underscores the ways ideas and politics intersect, shows how successful statesmanship depends on the right ways of thinking about the world. Buckley, it's fair to say, was Reagan's mentor in political philosophy. Reagan was the man of action who made his ideas come to life. To talk about the relationship between Buckley and Reagan, to shed some light on it and what it meant for America, I'm thrilled to introduce 3 people perfectly situated for the task. Each will speak for several minutes, and then we'll leave time for questions and a general discussion afterward. Let me tell you about them all at once to save some time. First up will be Brent Bozell, who through the Media Research Center that he founded and leads, is a relentless scourge of media bias. He is a prolific columnist and author. His 2004 book, Weapons of Mass Distortion, provides a comprehensive overview of the left-leaning distortions of the press, and he's a frequent talking head on Fox News, CNN, and other leading media outlets. A badge of honor is that he's been named the worst person in the world by MSNBC's Keith Olbermann on more than one occasion. And he also happens to be William F. Buckley's nephew. Following Brent will be one of my favorite writers, National Review senior editor, best-selling historian, and documentary filmmaker Richard Brookhiser. Rick is both an experienced political journalist with a memoir of his own long relationship with William F. Buckley to be published in a few months, and someone with a deep feeling and understanding for the importance of statesmanship, as anyone who's read his wonderful books on Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, and the Adamses will attest. Thus, he brings unique talents to bear on understanding both of our subjects today. And last but far from least, Rich Lowry, the man who has edited National Review for over a decade now, guiding it into the 21st century with Buckley-esque style and intelligence. Rich is a frequent guest host on Fox's Hannity and Combs, now just Hannity, and his twice-weekly column appears in around 90 papers nationally, including the New York Post. Rich is the author of an informative book about the Clinton years, Legacy, which was a New York Times bestseller, and is co-author with Keith Corner of a forthcoming spy thriller, Banco's Ghost, due out in April. Ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, Brent Bozell on William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan and the new book, The Reagan I Knew.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the Manhattan Institute for the invitation. We were told each to speak on a different level. I find it interesting that I'm speaking at all, given I told Linda this story a few minutes ago. About 2 months before the book came out, Linda Bridges sent me an email and said, if when the book comes out, if someone in the press wants to talk to you about your uncle and this book, would you do it? And I said, well, of course. And 2 months later, the book comes out, and the flyer comes out, and it says the release of the new book, The Reagan I Knew by William F. Buckley, blah, 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 to schedule an interview with Brent Bozell or Rich Lowry, call the following number. I didn't know I'd gotten myself into this, and it's really interesting doing a book tour on a book you haven't written. Try that sometime. I just did it. All right. Last week during the inauguration, I was doing a Fox interview, and I was asked this question: what are the lessons that Barack Obama can learn from George Bush, both positive and negative? The primary one I suggested was almost the first principle of politics, which is that in politics you must define or be defined. It's a lesson that was either lost on this administration or deliberately ignored by this administration, and it was ultimately the undoing of this past administration. Think about this for a second. When George Bush entered the White House in early 2001, the perception by so many of him, and perception being reality in politics, was that he was young, untested, naive to the point of ignorant, not ready for prime time. Dick Cheney, on the other hand, was cool, calm, collected, wise, tested, the adult supervision that George Bush desperately needed. That was how they went in. Look how they came out 8 years later. George Bush was the man who lied and thousands died. Dick Cheney was evil incarnate. Why? Because neither of them did anything to try to offset the redefinition that would come from their critics. I say this because when you think of Ronald Reagan, you think of a man who instinctively understood this one lesson in politics. Ronald Reagan was a product of Hollywood. He understood that the public spotlight meant everything. He understood that in politics, that perception is reality. He understood that whatever he projected forward was what the American people were going to see. And perhaps most importantly, he understood that if he didn't do it, his enemies were going to do that for him. Now, we remember how Ronald Reagan entered office in 1981. And it's interesting because his critics had two huge challenges that they were never able to overcome with him. The first one was that they never got their hands around the negative picture they wanted to draw of the man. They couldn't decide whether A, he was an old, doddering, ignorant, Class B Hollywood has-been nobody, or B, Dr. Strangelove, the man with the ultimate plan to destroy the world through a nuclear nightmare. And by projecting both, they succeeded with neither. The second problem they had was the force of his personality. The more people saw Ronald Reagan, the more they saw that he was a genuine person, he was genuinely kind, he was genuinely of good cheer, he was genuinely optimistic, he genuinely loved his country, he was genuinely fun, and oh my, what a sense of humor the man had. I say that for a reason. Because when you think about Bill Buckley and how he approached the political tribulations, he did it in almost the opposite fashion because he had to. When Bill Buckley launched the modern conservative movement in the 1950s, you could fit that movement in a phone booth. They didn't have a lot of friends. As a matter of fact, as one person told me once, we didn't have any friends. And therefore, it didn't make any difference what you did. With Bill, it was bombs away. Bill understood also, define or be defined, and he was going to define things his way. But he was going to define it in a battle-hardened manner. He was going to do it by attacking the other side. So Bill was Bill in the 50s and in the 1960s, constantly on the move, constantly attacking, constantly assaulting institutions. Oh, how he loved to challenge political correctness.